Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. You're joined by your hosts, Steph and Brandon. Today, we're going to be talking about RPE and how that works in relation to strength training and weight training. Brandon, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been using with your athletes with the RPE scale?
Yeah, so a lot of the times when I program for someone, so for those who don't know what RPE stands for, it just means rate of perceived exertion. And it's a method of auto regulating your athletes or your clients. So, for example, if someone's just starting and they don't know what their percentages are or what their best lifts are, if I say to complete an RPE of 7, it means that they probably can have 3 reps left in the tank. So they probably have 3 reps remaining at that weight. And it should be a fairly comfortable weight depending on obviously the reps and sets. But it's a lot easier for me to give someone an RPE than troubleshoot what are you going to do for that weight, or what are you going to do for that exercise, and what weight are you going to use. And it probably helps people when they're first starting out. And I like to use it just to see, okay, what is this person, responding, or how they're responding to this exercise, what weights are they using. And RPE can be really useful for beginners and also advanced lifters. So I find it's really useful tool in that sense. Whereas in the past, you probably know, we would probably more so prescribe the weights for people. We'll still, both of us, the way we program is very similar. We'll base obviously off percentages and use depending on the weeks, we'll work on off percentages. And then we just like to prescribe weights for people rather than write percentages down. And I find writing the weights down for them is definitely more of like a clear cut. This is what you want. This is what we want you to get out of the session. But percentages, and that's where the art of coaching comes in. And I think percentages, just as they are, they're just numbers on a sheet. And if someone's hiring either of us to program for a person, they want they want a little bit more depth than just here's a program on a piece of paper. And that's where a combination of all these things, RPE, and all these kind of tools come into play. And I think it results in a really good program.
Yeah, it's interesting because, percentages in strength training is the most common way that people will
Yeah, I think
program.
it's how a lot of people are exposed to.
Yeah, and like there's nothing wrong with it. And like we both did programs with percentages for our weights for years and years and years. And it got us really far, I think, and it worked really, really well. But I know from experience, and I'm sure there's plenty of other people out there as well, and this is just how I felt, but some days you'll see 80% written down and it will feel awesome and easy. And you're like, yeah, I can do more than this. And then the next week is meant to be like your light week and it's say 60 or 70%. And it feels harder than the week
Yeah, it
before,
still
which was
feels too heavy.
80%. And it literally will still feel too heavy. And you're just like, how can, in your head, it can almost play mind games with you a little bit, thinking, how can this 60% feel so hard
Yeah.
when 80% was so easy the week before? And, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. Even sometimes if, you've got your 1RM, it can feel easy one day and then your deload week, you're doing half of the weight and it's like the hardest thing ever.
Mhm.
So I really like this idea of RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. It's most common, I think, with like cardiovascular training.
Yeah, and that's its origin.
Yeah, and that's where most people know it from, like thinking about, okay, well, if I can do my cardio training at RPE 7, I can still be talking. If I'm working at RPE of 10, then I can't hold a conversation at all, totally out of breath. There's no way you're talking to me. So that's a really good way to sort of gauge the difficulty there. But I love how you've started to bring it into the strength training and programming for strength training. And I think it's such a great way to auto regulate for your athletes as well, because then, you don't, you're not overtraining. You're naturally going with what your body feels like it needs to do. And, when it's time to push, your body knows when to push. And when it's time to back off, your body knows when it's time to back off. What are you finding with your
Yeah, I think
athletes?
it's definitely it's obviously become RPE itself. It's obviously become quite popular to be used in terms of the strength realm. But I think it's really really important for weightlifting, and that's obviously what I specialize in and what we
Mm,
specialize in.
mm.
And I think when you're doing a sport that has a lot of it has a lot of fatigue on your nervous system, and there's a lot of other um, areas in stress management that I can't really be, written down on paper as far as how you feel when you do weightlifting, because usually you feel like
Yeah.
shit all the
Yeah.
time, and how your joints feel. And I think when you work with RPE, for example, and the client has a good understanding of, what is a proper 7, and they understand how to use the tool as well, it can be really, really useful. And, Goran will tell us all the time, One day you might be snatching 100 or 120 and it's really comfortable. And the next week, 50 kilos is just impossible. But 50 kilos might be a 6 out of 10, and that might be, or a 7 out of 10 for the day. And that might be what the program calls for. So I think RPE on light weeks, if the person, can use the tool really well, I think it can be really, really powerful. So I like a good mix.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, they're just tools
Yeah.
to use. And, there's definitely clients where it's not applicable. And even in the classes, for example, it's really good for us to use an RPE in a class because you have so many people starting that are new, and they won't
Mm.
know what their weights are, and they won't know what to do as far as percentages. So it can be quite confusing. So you have that conversation constantly. So to just tell a client, look, do your back squats and just make sure you can do 3 or 4 reps in the tank. And that might be a good 7 for you for the day.
Mm.
And that might be a good way to approach it. But there's definitely people in the class where it's not applicable. And like everything has its drawbacks. And there's people that they'll do a 7 or they'll do an 8 or even a 9, and they'll just sandbag the whole thing, and it's not a true indication of where they're at, and they don't
Yeah.
push themselves, and they
Yeah.
need the tool to say, no, this is what I want you to do. And that's I think where you got to make the call
Mm.
as a coach. And I think that's where experience comes into play with all this. And
Yeah.
you decide, no, I think this person needs this stimulus in
Mm.
order to get the adaptation that we want.
Yeah. So for weightlifting, when you're using RPE, I just want to clarify,
Yeah, this is the
it's
interesting part.
it's not difficulty out of 10. It's the reps left in the tank. That's how you like
Yeah,
to
it
prescribe
it
it.
can be translated like that. Like,
Yeah.
so obviously there's RIR, which is reps in reserve. So
Okay.
that's just the inverse
Yep.
of RPE,
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
obviously,
So if you
right?
said RPE 7, it would mean you'd have 3 reps left in
Yeah,
reserve,
and I think that's
essentially.
the misnomer with RPE as far as how people have brought it into
It can be
this space.
interpreted a couple of ways
Well, it
because
doesn't.
I would look at it and be like, oh, yeah, that's difficulty of 7 out of 10.
Well, technically it is.
Yeah.
Technically it is, but it becomes quite funny when you start, doing heavy singles or something like that.
Yeah.
And often it might look like, if you could do a 7.5 or something like that, if you were to gauge it like that, you could probably do this 3 reps. You could probably do 3 reps in the tank, but
Mm.
you could probably go heavier and still have 3 reps left in the tank. You probably couldn't do
Mhm.
4 reps.
Mm.
So it just depends how you translate it, but it's just a good tool to just keep someone, working in a good range.
Yeah.
I think.
Does it translate to percentages as well? So say,
Yeah,
for
it can.
example,
Yep.
RPE 7 could equal 70%.
Yes.
Can you see it like that as
Yes.
well? Or?
Well, it depends on obviously how many reps you're going to be doing. So,
Okay.
say for example, you could do without programming. Week 1, day 1 is 90% for our snatches sometimes, which is obviously wrong. But that's just
For
how
us in our programs,
well, that's
yeah.
how we've been how we've been brought up.
Yeah, we worked at like 90, 95, 100% all the time.
Oh, I know, which is obviously
So
not
painful.
not good, not good
The
programming.
Goran special.
Yeah, no, not a good idea. But yeah, so coming back to RPE, so I think a good way to understand it is, say for example, if you were given back squats and you had to do a triple and it was at an RPE of 8, so 3 back squats at an RPE of 8, and you did 100. If you thought you could still do 2 reps left, that you have 2 reps left in the tank, and the way they judge it is, okay, well, on your last set, do an AMRAP on that weight. So if you did an AMRAP on 100 and you got 5, that's a true 8
Okay.
because you had 2 reps left in the
Gotcha.
tank.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a way for people to kind of
Mm.
judge and gauge whether or not their estimates are
Okay.
true. Of it,
Yeah.
if you did an AMRAP and you got 12,
Yeah.
well, clearly that's not an 8.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it works well. But I think, just having the discussion with your client or athlete and discussing, how did it feel, or maybe
Mm.
just using this as a rating scale might prove as a good discussion point
Yeah.
in your check-ins when you're working with someone, even when you're working with your coach, and you can explain to them. It might be an easy way to articulate how did it feel, or if you
Yeah.
could go heavy, or you can do more reps.
Yeah. I think I really like it for both beginners and advanced athletes for a couple of different reasons. Like when you first get a beginner, what I've noticed is, well, they have no idea what their 1RMs are, first of
Well, I
all.
don't blame him.
And so, like, you're literally just teaching them the technique and the skills on the barbell, or sometimes even a broomstick if they're not quite strong enough for the barbell yet. Most people can do it with the barbell if
Yeah,
you teach them well. And
yeah.
I think we've had pretty good success, both of us, in teaching people to use a barbell. So yeah, when they're first learning, they don't know what their 1RM is. So like, how can you possibly give them percentages anyway? You just want to kind of say, okay, I want you to work to this difficulty level. When you feel like you're at this level, then that's when you stop. And I mean, we usually kind of get people to do 3 to 5 reps anyway when they're first starting out
Yeah,
to
they need a
practice
bit of
the
volume.
skill. Because yeah, they do need to practice the skill, and you need a bit of volume. But of course, they're staying really light. So yeah, once they've got that understanding, it actually works quite well because you're not working off a 1RM, which they have no idea what it is anyway. And then on the flip side, when you've got an advanced lifter who knows their 1RM, their 3RM, their 5RM, they know everything that they can do. It works really well because they usually know, okay, I know that I can do this weight for 3 repetitions quite easily. And then so they know that's what their RPE of 7 is. Or if they think that they can push it that day, maybe they can go 2 kilos more. So they have a really good understanding of where their body's at. So yeah, I think it works quite well for both.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have had some experiences where, and this is obviously people who are bad with RPE and can't be trusted, and that you'll say to do it, you'd say to do a 7, and they do a 7 and they overshoot and then it's a 9 and they fail, and that happens a lot as
Yeah.
well. So look, all that's where you got to make the call whether you want to choose whatever tool you think is relevant. And I find for myself, as long as the person understands, well, okay, at this phase in training, the stimulus that we want to get out of you in this exercise is this,
Mm,
and that way there they understand, okay, well, I don't need to. A good case is Romanian deadlifts or stiff-legged
mm,
deadlifts that are programmed for some clients, and some of them will do 20 or 30 kilos, and
mm,
then we won't get any stimulus out of that, like not a lot at least. And if our goal is hypertrophy, then we can push it a bit more. But if they're already doing really really heavy deadlifts,
mm,
and then they like full sending these Romanian deadlifts,
mhm,
and I'm only asking them to do a 6 or a 7, you can see how someone can be really fatigued in an area where we're not necessarily trying to fry that movement, and we're
mm,
not necessarily looking for a great adaptation in strength on that
mhm,
exercise.
mhm,
So I think, yeah, it just depends on what movements you find applicable for RPE. And I think I like to
mm.
have a bit of a balance. I think for weightlifting movements, I still trust myself more than I trust them
Yeah.
as far as what I like to prescribe.
Yep.
But for accessories and things, I think it works quite well.
Yeah. Do you still think that RPE fits in with like a normal periodization program as well? Like, do you still do, because you have blocks for your program, don't
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
When you do a weightlifting program, I know we're digressing a little bit, but does it fit in the same way that percentages would when you're doing blocks for a program
Yeah,
and
well,
periodization?
it's just a method of gauging intensity.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't really it's just a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we said. So it doesn't really, it, I know what you're saying. You're saying, okay, so how would you build it up and ramp it down?
Yeah.
And I think that's where, okay, we'll say for us, a typical program ends in week 4 where you'll do a heavy whatever it is, you build up to something. Say if it's a strength block and we're building up to a heavy triple, and I might tell the person just to build to a RPE of 9 or just go for a max.
Mm-hmm.
So just
That
go
heavy
find
triple.
find
Yeah,
a 10,
gotcha.
find your limit on this movement.
Yeah.
Or if they have been doing really well, maybe they do an AMRAP
Mm.
on a particular movement, and
Yeah.
depending on the
Okay.
goal.
Yeah.
But it depends on, yeah, obviously depends on what our plan is, and
Yeah.
that's basically what periodization is. So it's interesting, how do you ramp it up and ramp it down, and a deload, and this is where your deload week will look different depending
Yeah.
on the person. So depends on how close they are to a competition and how
Mm-hmm.
and when the competition is. If they're a week out from competition, you would want the intensity to be fairly high because they're going to be performing maximum lifts,
Mm.
and you want the volume to be quite low because they're obviously going to need to be fully recovered for the
Mm-hmm.
comp day. But and if you were to give someone 5 sets of squats at an RPE of 4 or 5, what would the point in that be?
Mm.
So you can kind of see how, well, that obviously doesn't really work. You're mainly operating in the end of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where, you come in as a coach and you decide, okay, well, that's where you manage that person's training volume and training load. And obviously there's a
Mm.
bit of an art to it all. And that comes just with experience.
Of course, yeah. It's like it takes time and practice to coach and program, and yeah, you learn from your failures as much as you do your successes when you're coaching someone and giving a program to someone. And
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I saw
yeah,
this on the internet. Let's try that. No, no, it's not how it
we
works.
don't do it like
No, no.
that.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
No, no.
Yeah, great. I love that little discussion about RPE. Is there anything else we missed, or that's pretty much
No,
everything?
I think we kind of
Pretty straightforward.
we went around and around.
Sorry, nice little circle there.
But I think yeah, I think we got, you guys probably learned a little bit about RPE, and you can kind of see from a coach's perspective, and this the application in a class setting,
Yeah, it's
how
quite good.
easy it is for me and Mario, for Mario and I as a coach, and soon to be you as well. Um, in the class setting, and how easy it is just to implement, because if you have 10 people in a class and you have a handful of beginners who are just starting out, at least the majority of the group understands what
Yeah.
intensity they need to be working at.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's just so powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Easy. Hopefully, you guys liked that little episode, little chat about RPE. And we'll be seeing you guys in the next episode. So, see you soon.
Bye.